Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you. It's good to be with you today. We're going to be continuing the Genesis study. For those of you who have been following me on this, we've been going through this on a lot of different places. I've done some of the Genesis study on my podcast. I've been doing some of the Genesis study on my blog. I've done some of it here on YouTube. I've probably done some of this in several different places. So this is going to be, I decided to do another video on YouTube here because I haven't done this for a while, and it's live, which means if I mess up, I can't edit it out or start over. Yeah, isn't that great? Who knows what could happen? My phone could start ringing, the cats could start meowing, they could knock my teacup over here. All sorts of wonderful things could happen. It's exciting to think about, isn't it? But anyway, so here's what I'm going to be doing. We're talking about Joseph today. We're just now getting into the section of Genesis about Joseph and all that it says about him. There's like from Genesis 37 to 50, it's basically all about Joseph. I mean, there's other people mentioned, of course, his brothers, his father, whatever. But most of what Genesis 37 through 50 records, the rest of the book of Genesis that we've yet to cover, is about Joseph. So, and we started on the last podcast that I did talking about him. So now what we want to do is to take some time to, before we get into Joseph's life, to learn what we can about his family. And what I've been using to go through the Genesis study so far is, and what I'm going to be using for the rest of it is the Precept Ministries Precept Upon Precept study guides. This is the old version. They now have a new one. They have an updated one since I got this last year. They've got some new ones. I don't know how different those are. I just know that they have different covers on them. They have green covers instead of white ones. And I think that some of the questions and material may have been updated. But the good news is about a Bible study is that the Bible never changes unless you're a Roman Catholic and your church added books to the Bible after it was already done. But that's another story. Or if you're Mormon or whatever. But I'm not going to get into that, except for the fact that I just did. So anyway, so as we go into this study now, we're going to begin by looking at Genesis chapter 35, verses 22b through 29. Again, it's Genesis chapter 35, verses 22 through 29. So let me pull that up here on Bible Gateway. I don't have the little program on my computer that I had before. For those of you who've seen other videos of mine where I could share my screen, I no longer have that program on my computer. So unfortunately, you're stuck with just seeing me, as horrible as that is. And we're going to be reading from the New International Version, the NIV. And let me pull up all my cross references and footnotes here. Excuse me. Okay, here we go. While Israel, that is, of course, Jacob. Remember the last podcast that I did, we talked about how Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Jacob means heel catcher, which can mean, deceiver, means he was a deceiver. And Israel means he struggles with God or he wrestles with God. And he got that name after struggling or wrestling with God, obviously, hence the name. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine. Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. Jacob had 12 sons. The sons of Leah, which is Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's servant Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's servant Zilpah, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Padan Aram. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So the first question that the study asks here is, how many sons did Jacob have? And of course, from what we just read, he had 12. Who was Jacob's father, and how old was he when he died? Jacob's father was Isaac. And let me see, according to the text here, I think it mentioned how old he was. Isaac lived 180 years. So that's how old his father was. We see that in Genesis chapter 35, verse 28. The name of Jacob's brother, that's Esau, of course. And then it lists below in the birth order of Jacob's sons and their mother, it lists Jacob's sons and their mother's names. And of course, we just went through that in the text. I'm not going to repeat that again because we just read it. But we do see, of course, that there's a couple of notes here that I will make that's in the notes here that wasn't in the text. Reuben, the firstborn of Leah and the firstborn of Jacob, was born in the year 1921 BC. And then Joseph, the one who we're going to be primarily reading and studying about throughout the rest of Genesis, he was born, his mother was Rachel, the one who Jacob, of course, loved the most. Remember, he married Rachel and Leah. He was tricked into marrying Leah because he wanted to marry Rachel, and then he ended up serving Laban for 14 years to get his daughter Rachel's hand in marriage. That would be, of course, Laban's daughter Rachel, not Jacob's, of course. And Joseph was born in 1914 BC. And so that's the only two notes from this study guide that is not included in the biblical text. Although we do see here that there's about a 7-year difference from the time his firstborn son Reuben was born and when Joseph was born. So now, with that being said, let's see what we can learn about Joseph's mother, Rachel. We're going to look up several passages to do that. The first is Genesis 29, verses 16 through 30. That's Genesis 29, 16 through 30, and we're going to see what we can learn about Rachel here. It says, now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel, as I've already said. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel. Easy for me to say. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. That tells you how much Jacob genuinely loved Rachel, that he was willing to work 7 years just to marry her. I mean, how many boyfriends, fiancés would work 7 years to get the wife they're married to? For that matter, how many husbands would work 7 years to get the wife they're currently married to? But Jacob genuinely loved Rachel and was willing to do just about anything for her. The fact that he was willing to do this. And then, of course, we see here in verse 19, it says, Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, as I said. Then Jacob said to Laban, verse 21, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." So he's feeling the urge to merge. He's ready. He's been waiting 7 years, and it's time to get going with this. He's ready. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I have served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." So Laban basically deceives Jacob here into working for him for 14 years instead of the 7 that they had previously agreed to for Rachel's hand in marriage, and doesn't tell him until after he's already worked for the 7 years. "Oh, yeah, by the way, like the Columbo thing, just one more thing." He doesn't tell him that just one more thing until after Jacob has already done all this. But again, we see as we go on here to verse 28 how much Jacob loves Rachel. And this is what we learn about her, is how much she's loved by her husband. And Jacob did so. It says, he finished the week with Leah. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. So he worked 14 years to marry Rachel. He was going to work for 7. He was willing to do that, but then he did double the work. He worked 14 years to marry Rachel. Again, that's definitely somebody who really loves this woman, that he's willing to do that. That's pretty awesome. Now we're going to look at Genesis chapter 29, verse 31 through Genesis chapter 30 and verse 8. And that's 29, 31 through chapter 30 and verse 8. This is about Jacob's children. It says, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. I don't know if there's a universal principle here or not, but I do know that there are several times in the Bible, not just here in Genesis and not just with Jacob. There are several times in the Bible, and I don't have the notes of this written down. I wish I did right now. But there are a number of times in the Bible where someone was not loved or whatever, and God gave them children. And there's also times where, we look at Zechariah and Elizabeth in the New Testament, the parents of John the Baptist. They were righteous people. They were holy people. They served the Lord faithfully all of their lives. Zechariah served in the temple, and yet they were childless for most of their lives. They were quite old before God miraculously gave them a child. And that kind of thing, it seems to go on whereas Leah, whom he saw who was not loved, she was given children. And there's passages that talks about, like in Psalm 127, that I think it's Psalm 127 that says, children are a blessing from the Lord. So the Lord sees that Leah wasn't loved, and so he blesses her with the ability to be able to conceive. I don't know if it might be a universal principle. It might not be, but for some of you who maybe have wondered in the past, why did this person get blessed with children and this other person who you or I may think deserves it more, why they weren't? Maybe there's something to that. I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to make a law here. I'm not trying to make a statement about. I'm not trying to put words in God's mouth. I'm just saying perhaps it seems like there's a pattern with this in Scripture. So anyway, verse 32, Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. And Reuben sounds like the Hebrew for he has seen my misery. The name means see a son. For she said, it is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that, because remember, the whole point of looking up all of these cross references here in this particular question is to see what we can learn about Rachel, not Leah. I could give a whole bunch of stuff about Leah, and I have in previous episodes of my podcast. I'm not going to do that here, but there is, so I'm going to try to keep this focused on Rachel whenever it gets to that part about her. Come on, Galaxy. You want to get on my lap? Good girl. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. Simeon probably means one who hears. Again, she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. So he was named Levi. Levi sounds like and may be derived from the Hebrew for attached. Notice the pattern here with the naming of these children. That's something we've seen throughout Genesis, where names of people and places are determined based on either characteristics about those places or events that happen there, or the desires of the people who of the parents. Now, today a lot of times I feel like a lot of people name their children just because they think a name sounds nice or sounds good. But when people name stuff in ancient times like this, especially in ancient Israelite society, names really meant something. And you were almost prophesying or declaring something over that place or over that person, or it was a memorial to something that had happened or that the Lord had done based on what the name was. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. So she named him Judah. Judah sounds like and may be derived from the Hebrew for praise. Hi, Galaxy, what you want? I hear you meowing over there. So, and then it says, then she stopped having children. So Leah, I will say this, I said I was going to try to keep this about Rachel. I made this point before when we were talking about Leah back when we were in this chapter, is that Leah was seeking love from her husband. Not that that's a bad thing, because husbands are supposed to love their wives. Both the Old and New Testament say so. But husbands are to love their wives, yes. But there's also this principle throughout Scripture that tells us that the sinful relationship in our lives is to be with God, and that all the other relationships that we have, we appreciate and we value as gifts from God, as gifts because of that primary relationship that we have with the Lord. That is the proper order of things. So Leah has been looking for love from her husband. And again, that's not wrong or bad. But I notice here and at the end of Genesis 29, she says, "This time I will praise the Lord." This time, meaning all those other times she wasn't. That central focus of her life seemed to be, I've got to get Jacob to love me. I've got to get Jacob to love me. I want my husband to love me. And the Lord all this time was blessing her with children when he saw she was unloved, because he wanted her to recognize that he was the one that she needed to love the most. That was the one, that was the relationship that she needed to cultivate, not just her husband, or not primarily her husband, but the Lord. That's what he wanted from her. Do you need food or something, the way you're meowing? I can't pause this. If you need food, I don't know. You're going to have to. I'll go look real quick and we'll see about it here in just a minute, okay? Let me see how long we've been going with this video. 21 minutes, okay. We're still in now we're going to go on to Genesis 30. Sorry. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, remember, she's the one that Jacob loves most. He worked 14 years for her. She became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." A little over dramatic, I think. But, I kind of understand where she's coming from, that she's obviously not going to die if she doesn't have children. But given that the primary role of a woman in those days was to be a mother and to bear children for her family, I can kind of understand where she's coming from, the desperation that she feels. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." And Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" I definitely get where Jacob is coming from here, even more than Rachel, because Jacob it's not like he's not doing his part. The Bible plainly says that Jacob loves Rachel more than Leah. So that he's not withholding affection, you know what I mean, from Rachel. He obviously loves her and is eager to cultivate that relationship with her far above the one with Leah. Yet Leah's the one having all the babies. So Jacob is understandably angry with Rachel. I was like, "Look, I'm doing my part here. We're doing the, we're doing the deeds, and it's not my fault. Talk to God. He's the one that's kept you from having children. It's not me." Then Rachel said, "Here's Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her." It's the same thing Sarah tried with Hagar back earlier in Genesis. So she gave her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me." Look at Rachel's attitude here. God has vindicated me. She's still caught up in this jealousy, which, she, in all likelihood, she probably loves Jacob as much as he loves her. It would be hard not to, given how much, all he's been willing to do for her. So the jealousy, again, is it right? Well, perhaps, but I definitely understand where she's coming from. But just like Leah, she's not getting the central focus and the primary focus of her relationship and her life from God. She's seeking it through her husband. and through the children that he can provide her. But now she says, God has vindicated me. Now she does give God credit, but again, it's about the vindication. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan. Dan here means he has vindicated. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So I think there's, this says to me a lot about Rachel. If not, it might be a stretch to say this says a lot about her personality in general or toward all people. But it definitely shows that she has a grudge against her sister, whether it started before this whole thing with Jacob happened or whether it's a lifelong thing, I don't know. But what we do see here is that it's definitely something that is defining at least this part of her life. But she says, I've struggled with my sister and I have won. So she named him Naphtali. Naphtali means my struggle, which, funny enough, I won't go there. I don't think there's any comparison between the two, so I won't say what I was about to say. Now we're going to look at Genesis chapter 30, verses 22 through 24. Genesis chapter 30, verses 22 through 24. It says, Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. So, especially in those days, and this is not unique to Rachel, this was a pretty common thing in that day, that a woman felt dishonored or disgraced if she were barren or childless. And so she's obviously feeling that disgrace by the fact that she has yet to be able to produce children. She's having to give a servant to Jacob to produce any children that belong to her. So then she finally is able to conceive, and she says, now God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph. Joseph means may he add. And she said, may the Lord add to me another son. And now we're going to look at Genesis chapter 35, verses 16 through 20. It's Genesis 35, verses 16 through 20. It says, Then they moved on from Bethel. While they were still some distance from Ephratah, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, Don't despair, for you have another son. As she breathed her last, meaning Rachel's dying here, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Anoi, or Ben-Ani. I don't know how to say that. I don't think it's Ben-Anoi. Ben-Ani? Ben-Oni. Ben-Ani means son of my trouble. But his father, that's what Rachel named him, but his father changed the name to Benjamin, and Benjamin means son of my right hand. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephratah, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. And I remember back when I was covering Genesis 35 a couple of podcasts ago, I found some YouTube videos of people making pilgrimages to Rachel's tomb. I thought it was very interesting that it's still there to this day. We still know exactly where it is, and that people will still honor Rachel. Galaxy, get off my computer. But the fact that people are still making pilgrimages to Rachel's tomb and are still honoring her to this day. Come on, Galaxy, you want to get on my lap? Here we go. You can get on my lap. Let's see if we can get you on video. Can everybody see you? No, they can just see me. There we go. There's Galaxy. Say hi, Galaxy. You want to say hi to all the people? Yeah, here's Galaxy. Yeah, she's a good girl. Yes, she is. Yeah. I love you, Galaxy. Okay, now. Okay, Ben Ani, Rachel's. Oh, we talked about Rachel's tomb. That's what we just did there. Okay, and that's all the cross references that we have in the study here. Has anything you observed helped you understand Jacob's or Israel's partiality toward Joseph and his brothers' animosity toward him? It will. Yes. Now, when we look at the first few verses of Genesis 37, and because this is the first one I've done on YouTube in a while, and because the previous one was on my podcast, I want to go ahead and read the first few verses of Genesis 37 to you again, just to give some context here. It says, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, that he wasn't the dancing queen, even though he was 17. Joseph was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. And the footnote here on ornate says, the meaning of the Hebrew for this word is uncertain, but it says here, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So yes, there's several reasons. Pardon my Marco Rubio moment there, as I have to take another drink. There's several reasons that help us understand Jacob's partiality toward Joseph and his brother's animosity toward him. First off, it says here that Jacob loved Joseph more because he was born to him in his old age. Also, there's the obvious reason is that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and so therefore he's going to love a child that comes from her. It only makes sense that he would love that child or show partiality toward that child more than the children that came from the other wives, especially Leah. And as far as the family dynamics there go, I mean, I'm reading somewhat into the text here because the text doesn't say this. But this family's growing up together. The children of Rachel, the children of Leah, that family dynamic, that jealousy, that back and forth, that competitive, trying to get their husband to love the other one more, or trying to get the husband to love them more than the other one. That's going to rub off on children because they're going to see that and they're going to be around that. And it would only make sense that the children would then inherit, if you will, the jealousy, the bitterness, the anger that was present between the two mothers here. So that doesn't help. Then, even if that wasn't the case, or even if that was maybe a minor reason, just the very fact alone that that Jacob is showing obvious favoritism and obvious partiality to one of the children, even without all that other stuff I just talked about, just that alone would cause understandable resentment. So I definitely understand why this happened. That doesn't excuse the brother's actions. It doesn't make it right, but it does explain it. And then the little note here says, in the times in which we live, when there are so many blended families as a result of divorce and remarriage, can you see the relevance of Joseph's story? And again, I think that is an obvious yes. The relevance of Joseph's story, again, because we live in a time of some, divorce and remarriage and blended families and adoptions and stepchildren and so on and so forth. The showing of favoritism in any of those. I remember watching an old Donahue episode on YouTube where it was all about blended families and how the dynamics of that and how these families that he was interviewing made it work, despite some of the obvious challenges. Rubio moment, hang on. So, the relevance of this, because we live in a society that has so much of that with the blended family now, then not showing favoritism is so important. Making sure that all the children feel equally loved, that none of them feel left out, that none of them feel like they're not cared for as much as the other. All that is very important, and we can learn from what I would call at least Jacob's parenting mistakes. If you live in, if you're part of a family where this dynamic is part of your life, or even if you just have a typical nuclear family where it's one husband, one wife, and the children, don't favor one child over another. Because if you do, resentment can result. And as we go through Joseph's life, as recorded here in Genesis 37 through 50, we see just how much that bitterness and that anger and that resentment, how it impacted everyone's life, this entire family. The note here says, maybe you have been there yourself or find yourself in a similar situation at the moment. It will be interesting, won't it, to see how this plays out and what becomes and what lessons there are to be learned and applied. And that's where I'm going to stop, because they basically just repeated everything I just said there at the end. But I really appreciate you guys tuning in today and watching this and going through the background of Joseph's family so that it can give us a better understanding of the why behind the struggles and the ordeal and the bitterness and that struggle of that, I don't want to say power struggle, but that family struggle. We understand that better when we understand where this family is coming from. Next time I do this, I'm going to turn that light off, because I just realized that I moved my chair out from behind it or beside it or whatever, and I just realized this light is shining so brightly behind my head, and it's okay, this is kind of distracting. So I'm going to shut that light off the next time I do this. And if that makes it too dark over here, then I'll leave that light on, turn this one off, and just move my computer over there. But for right now, this is Steve Johnson, and this has been the Wisdom on Wheels. Normally I say Wisdom on Wheels podcast, but we'll call this the Wisdom on Wheels show, since this technically is not a podcast. But thank you for joining me, and I look forward to being with you again soon. God bless, and have a good night.